Tonight I'm dragging a forbidden truth out of the dark, the industry of beauty that fed empires and devoured boys. You were never meant to hear this. You were meant to memorize dynasties like a lullaby, recite virtue like a spell, clap for poets who lacquered pain into elegance. But the lacquer cracks when you look close. Under it is a market, hunger converted into silver, children converted into status, silence converted into power. That is the door we're opening. Step carefully. On the other side, everything you admired demands a reckoning. Start where reputations go to hide, in the gap between what a culture boasts and what it buys. The histories glow with scrolls, pagodas, mandarins debating righteousness. The ledgers, when they surface, glow with something else. Prices for a face, a voice, a posture, a compliant mind. The myth says order. The receipts say supply chain. And the product is a boy who learns to speak like a scholar and think like a prisoner. Here's the shape of it. In the countryside, the sky is honest about famine. Seasons fail. Granaries lie. Fathers count ribs. Mothers count coins that don't exist. Predators arrive dressed as opportunity. They know what hunger does to a promise. They offer the trade, one child for the survival of the rest. They don't call it selling. They call it placement, service, cultivation of talent. But the vocabulary is camouflage. The transaction is simple. Beauty for silver, obedience for protection, a life for a story you're supposed to repeat as rescue. Once the price is agreed, the first erasure begins. The name that tethered the boy to a family is replaced by one that tethers him to value. Jade bright, autumn moon, lotus breeze. Poetic, yes, but poetry is also a mask. It turns property into metaphor and pain into performance. You will see this trick again and again, the language that makes atrocity feel cultured. It's a spell cast to keep witnesses asleep. From village to estate, the corridor narrows. The boy learns quickly that luxury is cheaper than freedom. Silk robs louder than hunger because it convinces you that the theft is kindness. He's trained to understand that approval is oxygen. He's trained to confuse applause with affection, silence with safety, and compliance with survival. And because the training works, you will be tempted to tell yourself he chose this. That's how the machine protects itself, by laundering coercion into consent through the repetition of ritual and the careful withholding of exits. This is not an anecdote. It's an operating system. It scaled across centuries because it solved problems for the powerful, loneliness disguised as taste, insecurity disguised as patronage, boredom disguised as art. Households needed status symbols that could talk. Courts needed favorites that could be discarded without heirs. Scholars needed companionship they could praise in verses while condemning the same acts in edicts. Priests needed donations laundered through a rhetoric of guidance. The boys were the hinge that let hypocrisy swing without squeaking. Why tell you this now? Because normalization is a machine, and machines travel well. The surface details change, the costumes, the ceremonies, the legal vocabulary, but the gears do not. Look at the logic, not the outfit. Isolate the vulnerable, aestheticize the transaction, ritualize obedience, reward silence, punish deviation, and call the whole thing tradition. If you don't recognize that pattern in your own century, you're not looking. It's there in factories no one visits, in contracts no one reads, in screens that grade your worth by engagement and train you to perform for a faceless master. The names are different. The metrics rhyme. You're going to hear defenders. They always arrive on schedule. They will say this is overblown, that boys studied poetry and music, that they were respected, talented, that gifts were given, that affection existed. Understand the defense. It points to the silk to distract from the lock. Skill is not freedom. A gift is leverage when the giver controls the exits. Affection is a tool when it is contingent on obedience. And talent becomes a cage when the performance is the price for being spared. So let's agree, before we go any deeper, on 3 rules for seeing clearly. First, names lie. Companion can mean commodity. Training can mean conditioning. Virtue can mean veneer. Second, beauty distracts. A perfect brushstroke can hide a broken wrist. A flawless area can drown out a cry. Third, power edits. Records are curated to flatter the hand that held the pen. Absences are evidence. Silence is data. Hold those rules because what comes next will try to hypnotize you. The rituals are choreographed to make cruelty look elegant. Morning recitations, afternoon rehearsals, evening performances, each framed as cultivation, each functioning as compliance. The schedule is the leash. Every mistake has a consequence calibrated to teach the same truth. Your value is external, your safety is leased, your future is a loan that can be called in without notice. Do not get lost in the palace yet. That maze will have its turn. Begin with the first sale because all the later pageantry is downstream of this bargain. The brokers learn to read faces the way butchers read marbling. Clear skin predicts resale value. Bright eyes predict stage presence. Graceful hands predict calligraphy that will impress guests. Even temperament predicts fewer punishments, which reduces maintenance costs. This is not romance. It is procurement dressed as taste. When families sign, they don't free a child from poverty. They bind him to someone else's appetite. And yes, sometimes the coin keeps a family alive. That's what makes the machine efficient and hard to shame. It hijacks the noblest instinct, protect your own, and weaponizes it against someone who is also your own. When survival and exploitation shake hands, the ledger balances. The conscience doesn't. That unresolved debt spills forward, staining every scene you'll watch next. Here's the promise I'm making to you, and the challenge. We will not look away, and we will not pretend that elegance absolves ownership. We will not call a cage a school or a leash a bracelet. We will count costs that the official histories ignored. When we find records, we will read them against themselves. When we meet a poem, we will ask what it edits out. When we hear tradition, we will ask who wrote it and who bled for it. You can still turn back. You can close this door and let the lacquer harden. You can go back to the flattering version, the one where civilization means civility, and civility means righteousness. But if you stay, you will not leave the same. Because once you learn to spot the machine, you start seeing its cousins everywhere. And then you don't get to say you didn't know. We're done with the prologue. Now we trace the pipeline from hunger to honor. We follow the men with bright smiles and soft words who travel village roads like migrating seasons. We watch how they measure a child's future with the same precision they use to weigh silver. We notice the contract's handwriting, beautiful, unreadable to the hands that sign. We count the steps from threshold to threshold as a boy is renamed into property. We memorize the first punishments that teach him which parts of himself must be forfeited to live. You wanted history to be noble. It can't be, not when it is honest. But honesty is the only antidote to repetition. The door is open. The air is colder here because the truth breathes differently. Step through. The first sale is waiting. Listen closely. History does not end when the page turns. The songs sung in banquet halls, the poems polished into anthologies, the cosmetics brushed over bruises, they still echo. Not in the same palaces, not under the same dynasties, but in the way a society learns to look away, to admire polish and ignore cost. Exploitation does not vanish, it adapts, changes costume, finds new stages. What was once lacquer and silk now wears glass and steel, but the architecture is familiar. The concubines are gone, their names dissolved, their graves forgotten. Yet the silence they were buried in has not been lifted. The system that consumed them left no monuments, only gaps, in family lines, in village memories, in the untold verses that could have been. History remembered emperors' whims and poets' flourishes, but the boys remain shadows at the edge of the record. That absence is itself a monument, an indictment carved from silence, and still they endure in fragments. A verse where beauty feels too sharp, too mournful. A folk tale of a boy who vanished into the city and never returned. A carved symbol in a beam of an old estate. These are ghosts that refuse erasure. They remind us that what was buried is not gone. Memory is soil. If you dig, voices rise. The echo is also inside us. Every time we measure worth by performance instead of dignity, every time we excuse cruelty as culture, every time we romanticize beauty without asking who paid for it, we repeat the pattern. The boys are no longer in palaces, but the blueprint lingers in boardrooms, factories, feeds, and laws. We carry their absence forward when we do not resist, but we can choose a different inheritance.
To hear their silence and break it.
To see their erasure and name it. To take the fragments and assemble not a monument of marble, but a practice of vigilance. To refuse the applause that makes cages look like theaters. To live in a way that does not build new banquets on old graves. The lacquer has peeled. The wood beneath is scarred but solid. If you carry anything from this descent, let it be this. Beauty without freedom is a weapon. Tradition without justice is camouflage, and memory without action is complicity. The boys did not survive to tell you this, but the echo remains. It is yours now. The first cruelty wasn't a beating. It was a price. In the village, before palaces and poems, the market arrives with clean hands and a ledger. The road dust has barely settled when a stranger's smile begins to rearrange a family's future. He doesn't call himself a buyer. He is a patron, a talent scout, a facilitator. He speaks the language of rescue, opportunity, education, security. But he carries scales. He measures beauty like grain. Hunger sets the table. A failed harvest, a debt that won't stop breeding, a tax collector who counts shadows as income. These are the conditions that soften a parent's grip. The buyer knows it. He times his visit for late afternoon, when stomachs are most persuasive and pride is tired. He does not insult anyone with pity. Pity can provoke a no. He offers flattery instead. A compliment sharp enough to feel like hope. The boy has a scholar's brow. His eyes hold music. Those hands were born for the brush. Compliments are the first currency. They make the next currency easier to accept. The exam looks like a blessing. In public, it's called an evaluation, a chance. In practice, it is inspection. Teeth are checked for health, gums pressed to judge nutrition. Fingertips are examined for callus. Too much labor lowers value. The spine is studied for posture, the walk for poise. The face is read not as a person but as a forecast. Will the jaw refine? Will the eyes brighten under indoor light? Will the voice crack pleasingly or betray itself? A boy's future is treated like a math problem the buyer already solved. Parents try to negotiate without revealing fear. They ask about terms, training, letters home, visits, wages. The buyer answers with phrases engineered to be remembered and impossible to enforce. Proper tutelage, cultivation, a gentleman's household, honor to your lineage. He produces a contract written in characters no one in the room can read. The document is beautiful, calligraphy like silk, seals like small moons. Beauty is part of the trap. It persuades you that the contents are equally noble. The buyer taps a line with a lacquered fingernail and translates it generously. A decade of service, food, and clothing provided. An allowance remitted. He doesn't translate the penalties for defiance or the clause that transfers guardianship like livestock. He doesn't need to. The money on the table does the rest. Silver arrives like weather, a pouch heavy enough to hush a house. Everyone hears the soft clash of coins. It sounds like lids on rice jars opening, like a sister's dowry paid, like a sick grandfather's medicine bought at last. The math is brutal and convincing. 1 child sacrificed, 4 saved. Love makes bad options look reasonable. Survival signs, quickly. The buyer is careful to let someone else move the contract closer. This way, when guilt comes later, it will find many fingerprints to accuse. The renaming happens fast. It always does. The boy's birth name has dirt on it. Memories, origins, claims. The new name arrives polished. Autumn Moon, Jade Bright, Lotus Breeze. It sounds like a gift. It is a lock. The syllables are chosen for marketability. Soft vowels that travel well through drawing rooms. Imagery that flatters fragile egos. The boy repeats it aloud as instructed. The old name is corrected out of him gently, then sharply. If he answers to it later, he will be punished for forgetfulness. Forgetting becomes a job. There is a ritual haircut that mothers remember more vividly than the signing. Hair is history you can touch. When it falls to the floor, something louder than scissors happens. The buyer's assistant wraps the cut hair in paper and pockets it. He will burn it later, because burning makes return harder to imagine. The boy is given a robe that feels like a promotion, silk against skin, color like a festival. He is told to stand taller. He is told to speak more softly. These 2 instructions will stalk him for years. Departure is designed to leave the least evidence. A cart waits away from the square. Goodbyes are discouraged as unseemly. Tears are reframed as ingratitude. The buyer thanks the parents formally, bows just deep enough to imply respect, not deep enough to suggest equality. He reminds them to be proud. Pride is a cheaper sedative than shame. It also travels better. On the road, the buyer manages inventory. He updates a ledger with neat columns, place of procurement, notable features, price, expected training time. He assigns each boy to a category: performer, companion, scribe in training, banquet ornament. These are not destinies. They are product lines. He calculates resale margins while the boys watch the fields recede like a map erasing itself. The first punishments arrive before the first lesson. They are small and absolute. Speak without permission in the cart? No food at the next stop. Cry audibly? Stand during the meal. Ask to go home? Slap. These punishments teach the grammar of the new world. Desire is a fault. Silence is safety. Obedience is air. By the time the cart reaches the estate, the boys know how to look at nothing in particular, how to swallow questions whole. At the gate, the estate pretends to be a school. There is a courtyard for voice exercises, a room with instruments on stands, a wall lined with scrolls. A tutor greets the boys with a voice that sounds like polished wood. He begins with etiquette, which is just choreography for hierarchy. Where to stand, how to lower the gaze, when to smile, how long to hold a bow. He praises precision and punishes hesitation. It takes 2 days for the boys to learn that fear freezes the body in ways that earn more fear. The solution, they discover, is to rehearse terror until it looks like grace. The allowance exists mostly on paper. Accounts are opened in each boy's new name. The balances grow and shrink according to behavior, lateness, posture, even weight. Purchases are made on their behalf, robes, cosmetics, ointments, and deducted at rates no one explains. Sometimes a small sum is sent home as proof of goodwill. It arrives with a letter written by the buyer's clerk, not by the boy. I am thriving. My studies are praised. Our family is honored. Parents reread those letters until the creases shine. Hope makes for excellent ink. Brokers hustle to protect the pipeline. They maintain relationships in both directions. Bribes for local officials who dislike disturbances. Gifts for minor gentry who recommend promising lads. Tips for servants at inns who gossip about which households are recruiting. They network like any successful sales force. They share data, which villages can't afford to say no this season, which regions produce boys with the kind of cheekbones that photograph well. In a century before cameras, they already think like advertisers. If a mother resists, brokers schedule a second visit when the father is absent. If a father resists, they return with a respectable elder to vouch. Resistance is treated as a scheduling problem. No one calls this slavery. That word would break the spell. The preferred terms are placement and service, sometimes adoption into culture. Words are chosen for their anesthetic qualities. They quiet the room. They keep neighbors from interfering. They allow the boy to imagine he is an apprentice rather than an acquisition. They let the buyer sleep. There are exceptions that keep the lie alive. A gifted boy who later publishes verses. Another who becomes a calligrapher in his own right. A third who earns manumission and buys a small house for his parents. These stories are recited strategically, like testimonials on a pamphlet. Their function is not to represent the rule, but to disguise it. They prove the machine has an exit somewhere, and that proof justifies feeding the machine more lives. Meanwhile, the quiet violence of paperwork continues. Guardianship is transferred in a registry that does not list feelings, only seals. The boy's age is adjusted to hurry past the scandal of childhood. His birthplace is refined to a district with better reputation. Records are weapons. They will be used later to prove he owes what he already paid with his name. By the end of the first week, the boy has learned how quickly a gift becomes a leash. The robe is lovely but required. The food is delicious but contingent. The praise is warm but comes with a fuse. He has learned the calendar too. Mornings for voice and verse, afternoons for instruments and posture, evenings for etiquette and recitation. There is no unsupervised hour. Sleep is rationed. Dreams are not. If you want to understand everything that follows, the training, the performances, the palace intrigues, you must keep this ledger in view. The system begins here, with a transaction that teaches everyone involved how to live with it. Parents learn to rehearse gratitude. Neighbors learn to mind their business. Brokers learn which words numb which consciences. Boys learn that the shortest distance between punishment and reprieve is obedience. That lesson is the foundation under every hall of mirrors we'll enter next. You can still console yourself that this is a story of education. It looks like one. There are tutors, schedules, assessments, certificates, but the curriculum is obedience and the diploma is replaceability. The boy is being taught to look like a choice other people made. That, more than any beating, is the first scar. We're leaving the road now. The gate is closing behind the cart. Inside, the training begins. Polite on the surface, ruthless at the core. Tomorrow at dawn, the voice drills. After breakfast, the calligraphy that punishes shaking hands. Before noon, the weight check. At dusk, the new name whispered until it erases the old one. Remember the price and remember who paid it. The next lesson is what they call cultivation. You'll recognize it by its other name, conditioning. They called it cultivation. It was really demolition and reconstruction. From the first dawn inside the estate, the boy learns his past is an obstacle, his instincts liabilities, his memories dangerous. Every hour is carved into lessons that do not belong to him, but to the people who now own his future. Training is the word written on the scroll. Conditioning is the truth stamped on his bones. The curriculum is dazzling if you look at it too quickly. Poetry, calligraphy, music, dance, philosophy, skills reserved for scholars and courtiers. A peasant's son would never have touched an inkstone, let alone composed a couplet. To outsiders, this looks like rescue, like social mobility, like refinement. That is the camouflage. The purpose is not to educate him into freedom, but to refine him into ornamentation. Every skill doubles as spectacle. Verses to be recited at banquets, brushstrokes to decorate letters of patrons, melodies to soothe or seduce. Knowledge is stripped of autonomy, repurposed as service. Discipline arrives in twin currencies, reward and punishment. The robe of silk given for a perfectly recited stanza. The extra bowl of rice granted for a flawless brushstroke. The slap across the face for hesitation, the missed meal for a wrong note, the whip for asking to rest. The logic is blunt but effective. Survival comes only through pleasing. Each boy begins to internalize that his own hunger, his own exhaustion, his own fear are irrelevant metrics. Only his master's approval counts. When that lesson clicks, the system wins. Physical regimens parallel the intellectual. Weight is monitored with the precision of livestock care. Too heavy, and he is berated for gluttony. Too thin, and he is accused of negligence. Cosmetics hide bruises, powders conceal blemishes, ointments bleach sun-darkened skin. Even posture is engineered. Spines forced upright by bamboo rods, hands trained to pour tea with grace no matter how much they tremble. Every visible inch of the boy must become an advertisement of his master's taste. His body is not his anymore. It is packaging. Isolation is another layer of conditioning. Letters to family are forbidden or forged by clerks. Conversation with servants is restricted. Any spontaneous bond between boys is discouraged, punished, or exploited. A trusted friendship could remind them of their stolen names, so trust is treated as contraband. Silence is safer. Loneliness becomes routine, so pervasive it starts to feel like air. And when loneliness feels normal, obedience is easier to extract. The paradox of the training gnaws at them. They are taught to think like scholars, to recite philosophy, to debate verses. But the one thing they are never allowed is independent thought. They can comment on the Tao, but not on their own chains. They can analyze loyalty in Confucian texts, but not question why loyalty is demanded from them without reciprocity. The brilliance they develop becomes another form of captivity, intellect harnessed for someone else's status. Their minds become as choreographed as their bows. Mortality stalks the classrooms disguised as discipline. Boys collapse from exhaustion during rehearsals. Malnutrition erases their childhood softness, leaving hollowed eyes and brittle bones. Records whisper of staggering attrition rates, half of every intake gone before their first public performance. Death is a problem only for parents, never for the households. A dead boy is quietly buried, replaced by another cartload from another starving village. The machine does not pause for funerals, and when the survivors graduate, the final layer of conditioning is applied: performance. They are put on display in front of guests or masters, their talents judged like calligraphy at an exhibition. A misplaced note, a clumsy turn, a hesitation in conversation, all are treated as defects in property. But a flawless performance is not freedom. It is proof that the system has worked. The smile on his face is rehearsed. The humility in his bow is trained. The applause is for the conditioning, not the boy. From this moment on, his old self is untraceable. He no longer remembers the rhythm of village mornings, the taste of food cooked for family, the casual way his name sounded in his mother's voice. Those memories have been buried under repetition, under punishment, under cosmetic disguises. He is a possession now, sculpted to believe he is lucky to survive, lucky to be chosen, lucky to exist at all. This is the architecture of control. Polish the surface until outsiders admire it. Strip the inside until the boy no longer recognizes himself, then display him as proof of refinement. Cultivation is not growth. It is pruning until only obedience remains, and tomorrow the pruning continues. Dawn will bring cosmetics to hide fresh bruises, verses to memorize under threat, posture drills enforced with bamboo, music rehearsals that draw blood from fingers. Every day is another lesson in erasure. Every day is another nail in the coffin of his old life. By the time he steps into a banquet hall or a master's chamber, the conditioning will be complete. We've seen the curriculum. Next, we see the cage where it unfolds, the routines, the punishments, the gilded prison that masquerades as privilege. Meet Lotus Breeze at dawn and witness the day-to-day script of survival. Luxury is cheaper than freedom. That sentence is the ledger that balances every lavish household you'll see. The boy wakes before dawn, not because he must, but because his schedule is the leash. The silk on his palate cools against skin that has learned to flinch. The window is a lattice that frames the sky like an exhibit, beautiful, untouchable. He sits up, breathes, and begins the performance that will be his life. Morning is grooming as ritual and rehearsal. Brushes are chosen like tools for restoration. Soft boar bristles for the brow, silver pins for the hair, powders that even out skin and hide bruises. The cosmetics smell of herbs and lacquer. They sting if the skin has been struck recently. An attendant, exactly polite, exactly watchful, applies them with an expertise that erases explanations. Cover the past, polish the wound. Apply scent that says delicate, robes that say owned, posture that says presented. Every stroke of paint is a small erasure. Every knot on silk is a tie you cannot see. Breakfast is not nourishment. It is a metric. The menu is measured in grams and glances. A favored boy may receive congee with sweet dates. An indifferent one, a thin broth. Portions are allotted to shape bodies into desirable curves and contours. Weight logs are kept as meticulously as ledgers. A missed target triggers a correction. Less food, more exercise, or a remedy that promises a slimmer silhouette by morning. Food becomes a tool of valuation. Hunger becomes the lever that lowers resistance. After grooming comes the drills. Voice, verse, brushwork. The mornings are noisy with recitations layered like music rehearsals. The boys stand in lines, backs straight, voices practice to hold volume without strain, cadence without personality. A tutor conducts like a conductor. He tolerates no deviation. Missed one tone and a strap might taste the small of your palm. Miss the rhythm of a hymn, and you will apologize to a room full of ears that do not care about your apology. The point of the drills is not only skill but indistinguishability. Each boy must become predictably pleasing. Predictability is saleable. Unpredictability is dangerous. The midday ritual is posture and presence. Etiquette classes teach minute gestures, the precise angle of a bow, the length of a stare that flirts with deference without offering itself. They learn how to pour tea with hands steady enough to betray no tremor, how to remove a slipper slowly so that a gentleman might be entertained by the motion itself. These classes double as surveillance training. Tutors note tremors, stutters the way a laugh cracks. Every quirk is catalogued. Every weakness becomes an opportunity for correction or punishment. Afternoons bring performance practice, music, dance, the string instruments that will make a banquet hush. Fingers press against strings until calluses form and bleed. Dancers throw themselves into positions until muscles knot and snap in private. The instruments become extensions of the boys' bodies. When the body falters, so does the music. A broken string is not a mishap. It is a deficit in marketability. Tutors fix strings, not wrists. Medicine soothes hands well enough to play tomorrow, if the boy can still hold a bow. Banquet nights are exams in theater. The household fills with guests who come to be entertained and to be seen entertaining. The concubines are presented like artworks on a gallery wall with built-in music and conversation. A boy recites a poem about moonlight and the court oohs. In the corner, someone tallies favor. A small laugh from the wrong place is punished with a cool omission tomorrow, a plate withheld, a compliment kept for another. Conversely, a flattering turn of phrase can earn silk, a night of better food, or the attention that keeps you alive until the next performance cycle. Surveillance is ordinary. Servants attend with eyes that double as report cards. Walls have ears. Corridors have informants. The household trains everyone within its bounds to be a censor. Even the stoops where servants gossip are watched because gossip is currency that can upend a favorite. The boys learn early that the room's kindness is contingent and that the smallest rebellion will echo into a ledger somewhere. Suspicion is baked into the architecture, and privacy becomes a myth. Punishment is calibrated cruelty. It is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is withholding, the simplest and most effective weapon. Food denies hunger but grants attention. A week without tea is a month of enforced shame. Sometimes punishment is public humiliation, failure called out as a flaw in a recital to remind all that grace is conditional. And sometimes it is physical, flogging administered in ways that will not mark the skin visibly, so the exterior marketplace is never sullied. The aim is to control the narrative, preserve the illusion of perfect beauty while ensuring no one becomes uncomfortably human in public. Healthcare is a gamble disguised as care. Treatments are given, but they are rarely in the patient's interest alone. Ointments that thin the skin for a paler hue, tonics that shorten appetite at the cost of strength, elixirs promising youth that burn the liver in time. These are medical economies designed to extend usefulness, not life. Healers know the calculus. A long career of small maintenance is preferable to a brilliant recovery that makes the household worry about the cost of continued attention. Thus, medicine is measured by usefulness, and illnesses that do not impair display are treated last. Between duties, boys learn the economy of silence. They study to read moods rather than ask questions, to anticipate desires before they are voiced. They craft faces that communicate submission tinted with just enough wit to flatter. They learn to laugh on cue, to look pained in a way that garners compassion without pity, to appear eager without seeming grasping. These are social skills forged under duress, emotional labor weaponized and branded as talent. At night, the compound is quieter but no less sharp. The favored sleep on cushions, the rest on pallets. Doors are locked, windows barred. A lone lantern might be left on as a test. Who will risk being seen consoling another? Who will leave the room empty to avoid being accused of conspiracy? The rules do not end when the day does. The shadows are part of the architecture of control. Even private whispers might be reported, forming a lattice of suspicion that is harder to escape than iron bars. Yet within these routines, small rebellions sprout, secret notes, a smuggled fruit passed at a price, a shared lullaby hummed under breath. These are furtive acts of humanity, tiny breaks in the protocol that remind the boys they are alive. They are risky. They are sacred. They are proof that the machine, for all its reach, cannot occupy every single inch of interior life. The gilded routine is a masterclass in making bondage both palatable and profitable. It turns training into theater, surveillance into etiquette, scarcity into a lever, and love into leverage. The household makes its product look like culture. It packages obedience in the vocabulary of cultivation. But package and product are both traps. Tomorrow, the stakes rise. Houses are small theaters. Courts are amphitheaters. A household's favorite can rise to a throne room seat and a letter of decree, or be cast into an unmarked grave if favor dies. The day-to-day choreography creates these possibilities. The boy who perfects his bow may be rewarded or sold or paraded. The one who missteps may be punished or erased. In the next act, we climb from the estate to the court, where favor is a currency that buys and obliterates men, where beauty becomes a political instrument and a personal peril. The household was rehearsal. The court was the stage. Step into the forbidden city and you feel the air thicken, not just with incense and lacquer, but with the invisible weight of ambition. Here, concubines were not just ornaments, they were variables in equations of empire. A smile could tilt policy. A whispered phrase could spark war. And a glance from the emperor could crown you or end you. The court's favorites lived in a paradox of privilege and peril. Their chambers shimmered with jade, gold-threaded silk, and perfumed screens. They drank wine sweeter than anything peasants had ever tasted, dined on dishes sculpted into art, and lounged in gardens designed like paradise itself. But luxury was a thin disguise. Each cup of wine could be poisoned. Each gift of silk could be a bribe documented in a rival's ledger. Each evening in the emperor's chambers could ignite jealousies sharp enough to draw blood. What looked like paradise was really a battlefield painted in silk. The ascent of a concubine often followed the same arc. A provincial tribute, a gift from a governor seeking favor, or a boy purchased from a merchant's household would catch the emperor's eye at a banquet. A song sung too perfectly, a joke timed too well, a face so luminous it silenced a hall. These were openings. The emperor might summon him once, then twice, then every evening. Suddenly, he is not just property, but the property of the throne itself. His status skyrockets overnight, dragging his family with him. Parents who once sold him might receive estates. Brothers might gain official titles. Entire clans could be elevated on the fragile scaffolding of his beauty. The story of Dong Xian under Emperor Ai of the Han Dynasty remains the most notorious parable. He entered court as a minor official, just another name among hundreds. Within weeks, he became the emperor's obsession, granted treasures, estates, and unprecedented authority. His power grew so immense that courtiers bypassed the throne to curry favor with him. But what was painted as romance, the famous cut-sleeve anecdote, was also a political earthquake. Every rival sharpened knives. When the emperor died suddenly, Dongxian's meteoric rise collapsed into a plummet. Stripped of power, threatened with torture, he chose suicide. His story became legend, not because it was rare, but because it was exemplary. Court favor was a ladder greased with blood. The Ming Emperor Zhengde crafted his own theater of indulgence. He gathered dozens of boys in a palace wing called the Leopard Quarter, companions not only for banquets but for hunts and even military campaigns. They wore armor beside him, issued commands in his name, and distorted the machinery of governance. Officials condemned these favorites as reckless, their decisions catastrophic in war and finance. But emperors wielded them as shields, scapegoats for misrule, distractions from discontent. When chaos followed, it was the concubines who burned while the throne survived. Danger lurked not only in imperial whims but in rival factions. A favorite could be accused of corruption for accepting a gift, of treason for whispering advice, of sorcery for holding the emperor's gaze too long. Rumors were weapons. A servant's testimony could become a death sentence. Some were poisoned quietly, others framed publicly, their bodies dumped outside the palace walls with their names erased from records. Survival required more than beauty. It required political cunning sharp enough to slice through layers of deceit without ever appearing ambitious. Too much ambition was fatal. Too little made you disposable. Daily life in court revolved around theater. Favorites were expected to perform intellectual companionship, reciting verses, debating philosophy, or weaving flattery so skillfully it sounded like honesty. They provided entertainment not just for the emperor, but for foreign dignitaries, their bodies and talents deployed as soft power. A flawless performance could elevate imperial prestige. A faltering one could embarrass the throne. The pressure was merciless. Each word carried stakes far larger than applause. It could decide policy or provoke rebellion, yet beauty was the most perishable asset. A boy's prime was measured in years, sometimes months. Cosmetic regimes grew harsher, diets stricter, medical concoctions more desperate as they tried to preserve youth against the erosion of time. When the emperor's gaze shifted, many fell into oblivion. Some were quietly reassigned, stripped of silks, given menial posts that mocked their former glory. Others vanished entirely, their fates unrecorded, their graves unmarked. In court, the line between existence and erasure was thinner than a calligraphy stroke. The hypocrisy surrounding these relationships was staggering. Confucian scholars wrote odes to the purity of male companionship, even as they condemned any deviation from virtue in public discourse. Buddhist monks blessed favorites in private while denouncing indulgence from the pulpit. The empire wrapped exploitation in the rhetoric of refinement, disguising possession as poetry, indulgence as culture. This hypocrisy was not incidental, it was structural. It allowed emperors to indulge while preserving the facade of moral authority. The imperial court revealed the system's full cruelty. Concubines were not only possessions, but political instruments, their fates tied to the pulse of a single man and the envy of an entire bureaucracy. They embodied both power and vulnerability in a single fragile body. Their rise could ignite wars, their fall could rewrite dynasties. They were trophies, scapegoats, symbols, pawns, everything but human beings. The court was not the end of their story. Beyond it stretched an entire society complicit in the lie. Scholars justified, poets romanticized, monks concealed, families sold, and markets thrived. The hypocrisy was not confined to palace walls, it was the foundation stones of the empire itself. And that is where we go next, into the machinery of contradiction that kept this system not only alive, but celebrated. The palace was the furnace, but the fire was fed by society. To understand how the system endured for centuries, you have to trace the scaffolding of contradictions that propped it up. Every class, every institution, every cultural symbol played its part in normalizing what should have been unthinkable. The hypocrisy wasn't a bug in the system, it was the engine. Start with the scholars. Confucian literati, the moral gatekeepers of empire, produced libraries of treatises on family virtue, filial duty, and ethical governance. Publicly, they thundered against excess, preached about restraint, and condemned deviation from ritualized norms. Privately, many kept their own favorites. In essays, they argued these relationships were purer than marriage because they were free from the obligations of inheritance. They dressed possession as philosophy, indulgence as intellectual companionship. The hypocrisy was breathtaking, but it was also strategic. A scholar could moralize in public while indulging in private without ever admitting contradiction. Virtue became a mask that concealed appetite. Then came the temples. Buddhism preached detachment, the release of desire, the pursuit of enlightenment. Yet temples became both markets and sanctuaries for the trade in boys. Wealthy patrons donated lavishly under the guise of piety, while arranging for their companions to reside in temple quarters, cloaked in sanctity. Some monks even kept favorites themselves, twisting doctrine into justifications about mentorship or spiritual cleansing. What should have been sanctuaries turned into theaters of corruption. But society looked away, accepting the contradiction because it suited both the elites and the institutions that profited. Literature carried the lie deeper. Poets like Li Bai and Du Fu, whose names shine as monuments of Chinese culture, composed verses that romanticized male beauty and companionship. Their words were elegant, subtle, and loaded with cultural prestige. A single poem could transform ownership into refinement, making a concubine into a muse. Verses that should have been read as coded confessions of exploitation were instead celebrated as art, teaching generations that desire cloaked in poetry was culture, not cruelty. Art did not merely reflect the system, it advertised it, made it aspirational. Economics reinforced the cycle. In famine-stricken villages, families faced brutal arithmetic: sell a son or starve. Male concubines fetched higher prices than daughters, sometimes enough to fund a daughter's dowry or save a farm. Parents rationalized their decisions as sacrifice for survival, convincing themselves their son's suffering bought the family's future. Matchmakers and talent scouts, the renya, the human teeth, turned this desperation into industry. They scoured villages like wolves, checking boys' teeth, inspecting their skin, predicting how beauty might bloom with age. Contracts were written in language illiterate peasants could not read, binding boys into servitude with no recourse. Poverty became the fuel, desperation the lever. The elite knew this and never stopped exploiting it. Class division made the hypocrisy unassailable. The wealthy never sold their sons, only purchased the sons of the poor. It created a world where suffering was outsourced downward, where pain became a resource the elite consumed without guilt. In Beijing, families flaunted their collections, speaking of them as one might of horses or paintings. In southern provinces like Guangdong and Fujian, discretion prevailed, but the trade thrived in secret. Port cities like Guangzhou bustled with ships carrying human cargo alongside silk and spice. The economy of exploitation was vast, organized, and utterly unapologetic. The government's role was not absence but complicity. Laws against concubinage appeared sporadically, especially under dynasties eager to appear moral in the face of foreign scrutiny. But enforcement was a farce. Officials who proclaimed reform often maintained their own collections. Prosecutions targeted rivals, not perpetrators. The Qing dynasty, pressed by Western missionaries in the 19th century, issued stricter codes, but even emperors kept favorites in private. Morality was weaponized selectively, a sword unsheathed only when it served the ambitions of power. What emerges from these layers is not inconsistency, but architecture. Hypocrisy was the mortar binding society together. Scholars provided intellectual cover. Monks cloaked indulgence in sanctity. Poets beautified possession. Families supplied the bodies. Markets managed the transactions. Officials enforced selectively. Every layer reinforced the others, creating a system so normalized it became invisible. People did not see cruelty. They saw tradition, refinement, even culture. And once cruelty becomes culture, it is untouchable. Why does this matter? Because it shows how societies don't just tolerate exploitation, they engineer it. They build institutions to justify it, culture to romanticize it, laws to regulate it, markets to profit from it, and philosophies to disguise it. The male concubine system was not an aberration hidden in shadows. It was a public institution, celebrated by elites, sustained by contradictions, and accepted as normal by those too desperate to resist. But culture alone didn't consume these boys. Their bodies and minds bore the direct cost of this architecture. Behind the silks and poetry, the toll was brutal. Physical degradation, mental collapse, lives burned out before they reached manhood. To understand the system fully, we have to look at the price paid in flesh and psyche. That is where we descend next, into the human cost that history tried to bury. The truth bleeds when you strip away the silks. Behind every robe, behind every poem, behind every banquet performance was a body deteriorating, a mind unraveling. These boys weren't preserved by luxury. They were consumed by it. Their youth was not extended, it was extracted, drained, sold until nothing remained. The decline began almost immediately. By their early teens, concubines showed signs of premature aging, hollowed eyes, brittle hair, pallid skin powdered to hide the gray beneath. Stress-carved lines where childhood should have been. Malnutrition gnawed at them even when banquets overflowed with food. Their meals were rations measured not for nourishment but for appearance. Stay thin, stay delicate, stay marketable. Hunger became a constant companion, dizziness a daily test. Their bodies learned to endure exhaustion as the default state. Cosmetics promised beauty but delivered pain. Powders laced with lead or mercury burned into the skin. Elixirs brewed with toxic herbs promised eternal youth but destroyed liver and kidney. Oils used for hairstyling scalded scalps. Treatments for blemishes left scars more dangerous than the imperfections they concealed. Beauty was maintained through methods that quietly poisoned the very boys they adorned. The illusion of perfection demanded sacrifice, and the sacrifice was always health. Physical abuse was normalized as training. A missed note invited a slap. A faltered bow drew the whip. Some masters enjoyed cruelty as amusement. Canes cracking ribs, fists leaving bruises hidden under silk, lashes falling across flesh later concealed with powder. Injuries were rarely treated properly. A broken finger was splinted crudely, only to heal crooked and stiff. A limp was disguised, not cured. Health was not a priority. Only the appearance of grace mattered. Illness was a death sentence. An unwell concubine was useless. Many died quietly of fever or infection, their names erased, their graves unmarked. Addiction crept in as both escape and control. Opium flowed freely through elite households, its haze a brief reprieve from the weight of fear. Masters sometimes encouraged it, knowing an addict was easier to command. Within months, dependency wrapped around them like invisible chains. Their bodies trembled, their minds dulled, their will eroded. The drug that gave them fleeting freedom became the leash that bound them tighter. And then came the psychological toll, the cruelty no powder could hide. From the moment of purchase, boys were conditioned to believe their only worth lay in obedience. Homesickness was punished as weakness. Tears brought humiliation. Independence was starved, beaten, mocked out of them. They learned to bury every natural instinct, to smother every spark of defiance. Anger, fear, longing, every emotion was rewritten into the performance of devotion. They smiled when ordered, laughed when commanded, knelt when expected. Their identities were dismantled piece by piece until only the mask remained. Anxiety became their constant shadow. They lived in terror of a master's mood, every gesture calculated to avoid punishment. Depression seeped into the silence of locked rooms. Some disassociated, splitting mind from body just to survive the intimacy forced upon them. Suicide was common, though rarely acknowledged. Boys leapt from rooftops, drowned themselves in ponds, tied ropes around their necks in the quiet hours. Death was often recorded as accident, a convenient lie to protect reputations. Their suffering remained invisible, even in their final acts of resistance. Isolation deepened the wounds. Friendships were dangerous, often betrayed for favor. Trust could mean ruin, yet small bonds still flickered. Whispers in the dark, a shared scrap of food, a song hummed softly between barred windows. These fragile connections were the only reminders they were human. Without them, many lost themselves entirely. Historical accounts describe concubines who stared blankly for hours, laughed at nothing, spoke only to themselves. Madness was the final refuge of minds broken by captivity. This was not accidental damage. It was engineered destruction. The system profited from breaking human beings, molding their pain into performances of beauty and obedience. Their suffering was not a side effect. It was the price of sustaining the illusion of culture and refinement. Their bodies were consumed like currency, their minds dismantled as collateral. By their mid-20s, most were discarded, used up, replaced. Few lived to old age. Fewer still lived free. Why does this matter? Because it reveals the true cost behind the poetry, the banquets, the legends. Every verse romanticizing male beauty was written over a grave. Every banquet performance was staged on bones. Every whisper of refined companionship was financed by suffering. The human cost was staggering, but it was deliberately hidden. Society saw the performance, not the pain. And that concealment was the ultimate cruelty. But even in this abyss, sparks of defiance remained. Not all bowed completely. Some found ways to resist, to cling to fragments of humanity, to dream of escape. Their resistance was fragile, dangerous, often doomed, but it existed. And it is there, in those faint rebellions, that the story shifts from pure tragedy to something more complex. Next, we turn to the hidden networks of survival, the quiet acts of defiance that proved even in the darkest systems, the human spirit refuses to be extinguished. Darkness does not erase the instinct to fight. Even in the most suffocating cages, even under the heaviest chains, the human spirit searches for cracks. The male concubine system was designed to extinguish resistance, to grind obedience so deep it became reflex. Yet history whispers of sparks, small, fragile, but undeniable. These boys, stripped of names and futures, still found ways to resist, to survive, to prove they were more than the roles forced upon them. The most common rebellion was invisible: endurance. To live another day was defiance in itself. They whispered their real names to themselves before sleep, refusing to let memory die. They carved symbols into wood, tiny marks that testified they had once been someone else. They sang lullabies from their villages under their breath, smuggling fragments of their old lives into the silence. Every stolen memory was an act of resistance against erasure. Then there were the networks. In households crowded with dozens of concubines, fragile alliances emerged. Older boys passed on survival tactics, how to read a master's moods, which punishments were survivable, where to hide food for lean days. Newcomers learned quickly that kindness could be dangerous, but they also learned to decode signals. A glance warning of danger, a phrase offering solidarity. Some boys smuggled fruit under robes to feed the punished. Others whispered warnings about cruel patrons, sharing intelligence like soldiers in enemy territory. These networks were fragile, vulnerable to betrayal, but they endured because survival demanded them. Escape was the most dangerous dream. Locked rooms, guarded estates, and a society that treated them as property made flight nearly impossible. Yet some tried. Chronicles from the Song dynasty mention concubines who pried open shutters with stolen knives, only to be caught before dawn. Their punishments were unrecorded but can be imagined. Yet the fact of their attempt mattered. It proved that hope survived conditioning. Rare successes fed the legend. One boy who used his mastery of calligraphy to secure employment as a scribe, eventually buying his freedom. His name appears in an obscure Tang chronicle, a flicker of possibility that lit fires in the hearts of others, even if most would never follow. Some acts of defiance were quieter but no less powerful. Concubines sabotaged performances by feigning illness, forcing delays that embarrassed their masters. Others spread rumors within the household, pitting rivals against each other to ease pressure on themselves. Some exploited their training, turning flattery into manipulation, coaxing small privileges, buying extra hours of rest with carefully timed compliments. These weren't revolutions, but they were victories, proof that even conditioned obedience could be weaponized for survival. And then there were bonds that defied the rules of isolation. Friendships, sometimes love, bloomed in shadows. Boys shared secrets at risk of betrayal, confided memories of home, promised to remember each other even if separated. Some chose death together rather than face exile apart, hanging themselves, drowning in ponds, slipping silently into oblivion as an act of solidarity. These tragedies were also rebellions, rejecting the system's demand that they submit alone. The decline of the system added another dimension to survival. In the late Qing dynasty, as Western missionaries exposed the trade, reformist voices began pressing the court for change. Concubines whispered about abolition, about the possibility of a future where boys were no longer bought and sold. The Republican Revolution of 1911 outlawed concubinage. Enforcement was uneven, but the cracks had opened. Some of the last concubines vanished into the masses, changing their names, burying their pasts. Others were left destitute, abandoned when masters fled or lost power. Many did not survive, but the system itself began to collapse, proving that no architecture of cruelty, however entrenched, is eternal. These sparks, small alliances, whispered names, acts of sabotage, escapes, forbidden loves are not just footnotes. They are the proof that the system never fully won. For every boy broken, another carved his name into wood. For every suicide silenced as accident, another smuggled food to a starving friend. For every network betrayed, another flickered into being. Resistance did not topple the system, but it preserved humanity inside it. It proved the architects of control could not erase the instinct to fight back, and that is the lesson carried forward. Exploitation thrives when it convinces its victims they are powerless. These boys showed otherwise. Their rebellions, however small, ripple across time as reminders that even in the abyss the human spirit sparks. But their story does not end in whispers of resistance. To see the full weight of this history, we must confront its reflection in our world today. The systems of exploitation did not die with the dynasties. They evolved, and that final descent brings the mirror directly to us. You've walked through the rooms they locked. You've counted the prices they hid. Now hold the mirror steady. The story you just heard is not a museum exhibit to admire and forget. It is a blueprint, ugly, efficient, resilient. It mapped how a society can normalize the unthinkable when it flatters the powerful and feeds on the desperate. If you think we retired that blueprint, you're still under the spell. The costumes changed. The mechanism didn't. Start with the gears you can name without flinching. Commodification, normalization, aesthetic laundering. The boys were priced, trained, displayed. Today, bodies are priced by other metrics: productivity per hour, cost per unit, revenue per follower. Normalization used to be ritual and poetry. Now it's policy language, brand voice, engagement dashboards. Aesthetic laundering used to be calligraphy and odes. Now it's glossy campaigns, ESG reports no one audits, philanthropy that buys silence cheaper than change. The vocabulary is modern. The appetite is ancient. Look at the pipeline. Then famine and tax. Now, debt and precarity. Then brokers on dusty roads. Now, recruiters with perfect slides and contract clauses like tripwires. Then inspection for beauty and pliancy. Now, psychometrics for culture fit, performance metrics for potential, algorithmic scores that forecast obedience disguised as success. Then new name is lock. Now, ID badges, account logins, NDAs, non-competes, the quiet prison of a personal brand built on someone else's platform. Different props, same choreography. Look at the cage. Then barred windows and attendants who reported whispers. Now, surveillance that lives in your hand, keystroke trackers that count hesitation, cameras in factories, and wellness forms that harvest confession. Then, tutors who taught etiquette as obedience. Now, trainings that teach you the correct tone for dissent, HR scripts that absorb rage into feedback cycles, DEI statements that change vocabulary faster than they change power. Then punishments calibrated not to leave marks. Now, blacklists that never send an email, references that stall careers without saying why, credit scores that whisper no to landlords you'll never meet. Some chains jingle, some chains hum. Look at the theater. Then, banquets where performance purchased mercy. Now, meetings where performance buys runway, timelines where performance buys relevance. Then, applause measured survival. Now, metrics measure permission to exist in the feed, in the org chart, in the supply chain. When applause is a condition of safety, you are already on a stage. When a stage is everywhere, privacy is a rumor. Look at the priests. Then, scholars and monks who baptized appetite with virtue. Now, thought leaders and influencers, consultants and compliance officers who compose hymns to best practices and shared values. Some believe. Some sell. Both keep the wheel turning. When a culture wants to keep a system, it hires a choir. Look at erasure. Then, unmarked graves, missing records, stories rebranded as poetry. Now, sealed settlements, NDAs that chew truth, datasets that discard outliers because they complicate the model. Who gets archived with care? Who gets summarized until their outline is unrecognizable? Power edits. It still does. Your memory is the only editor that isn't on payroll, so what now, besides outrage? Outrage is a spark. Sparks need kindling and aim. Start with attention, the currency the machine covets most. Refuse to spend it where erasure is the business model. Build a habit of asking the unsentimental question, who is paying for this elegance? If a product is cheap, what body subsidized it? If a story sparkles, what pain did it lacquer over? If a leader sells culture, whose voice did they price out to make the sales deck sing? Audit the pipeline in your reach. If you hire differently. Tear the euphemisms off the contract. Perpetual license for a creator's work is ownership by another name. At will is a velvet whip. Internship unpaid is extraction pitched as opportunity. Rewrite what you can. Refuse what you can't rewrite. If you buy with questions. Where was this made? Is not nosiness. It's ethics. If a company can track a package to your door in an hour, it can track a living wage to the hands that made it. If it chooses not to, it shows the old blueprint. Invest where the machine fears. Local watchdogs. Labor defenders. Survivor-led trafficking orgs. Boring, unfashionable groups that take receipts, file suits, sit with victims after the cameras leave. The algorithm won't recommend them. That's how you know they're working. Give them money, time, amplification. Give them memory. Practice disobedience in miniature. It matters. Decline to normalize what your circles call just how it is. Refuse to laugh along when cruelty is rebranded as culture fit or hazing makes you stronger. Don't pass the story you haven't read. Don't share the clip that steals someone's labor with a crop and a caption. If you manage people, do not build a team on fear and call it high standards. Build conditions where dissent is safe and praise isn't currency. If you are the vulnerable one, map the power you do have, collective more than individual. A solo whisper is fragile. A chorus bends doors. Hold art to account without burning it. Read the old poems with both eyes open. Admire the line and name the lie. Demand contemporary beauty that refuses to launder harm. If a museum funder buys silence with wings and wine, ask out loud what the plaques don't say. If a platform valorizes creator economy but takes the lion's share, call the math theft. Elegance that cannot survive scrutiny is cosmetics on a bruise. Remember that memory by itself is not absolution. The Empire edited. You can reverse some of that edit. Say the quiet parts out loud. Boys were bought. Bodies were currencies. Companionship was cover. Grace was coerced. Graves were hidden. When someone folds the past into a morality tale that flatters the present, interrupt. The point of remembering is not performance. It is prevention. Do not romanticize resistance either. Most who fought lost. Many who survived did not win. They endured. Honor endurance. It is the seed from which larger refusal grows. Start at your scale. Expand. There is no glamorous revolution coming to rescue your conscience. There is granular responsibility. Exercise today and again tomorrow until it accrues into a shape that cannot be ignored, and guard your own interior life like a jailer who switched sides. The old system colonized minds by training boys to mistake approval for oxygen. The new system isn't shy about trying the same trick. Step back from the counters that turn human presence into scoreboards. Sit in quiet that no platform can monetize. Learn to want less noise so you can hear more truth. You cannot resist a machine while begging it to notice you. This story asked something of you when you walked in. It asks more now that you're leaving. Not performative outrage. Not a comment that buys you indulgence. Action scaled to your reach, repeated until it is character. You don't need permission. You need a line you won't cross and a circle you'll protect. If you made it this far, carry the names that were erased, even if we do not know them. Carry the lesson that beauty without dignity is a weapon, that culture without conscience is camouflage, that power without accountability is just hunger with a throne. Carry the refusal to call cages schools or chains bracelets. Carry the nerve to ask every time, who paid for this? The lacquer is off. The wood underneath is scarred, but it is real. That's what truth gives you. Not comfort, not absolution, but grip. Use it, speak it. Build with it. And when the room goes quiet because the choir got nervous, keep your voice steady. This is where normalization ends, with someone who refuses to applaud.